Listen up. There's no more excuses.
We're empowering those who want the hustle by exposing the status quo.
The days of ordinary are over.
It's time to crush mediocrity and start discovering your greatest potential.
Welcome to the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle.
Welcome back to another episode of the Hustle Nation podcast. Today, we've got a real treat. Mr. Grant Baldwin is in the house. He is founder and CEO at the Speaker Lab, where they help aspiring speakers get consistently booked and paid to speak through our Speak framework, or the business of side speaking as it's known. Despite starting his speaking career with no audience, no following, and no network, Grant has earned over $2 million from 500 plus paid engagements all over the world. He's also host of the Speaker Lab podcast. Grant, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks guys. Appreciate you letting me hang out with you today. This will be fun.
Excited to have you.
Real pleasure. Yeah, I've been following you now for quite a while, both on Facebook and LinkedIn. I think I first crossed paths with you probably in one of your Facebook advertisements. And initially, the Speaker Lab, it kind of stuck with me because like a lot of entrepreneurs, like a lot of business leaders, I aspire to really grow my speaking, not only my ability to speak, but have more speaking opportunities. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit more about your journey and how you got to where you are now with the Speaker Lab.
Yeah, so if we go way back in time, in high school, I was really involved in my local church. My youth pastor had a really big impact in my life. And I was like, I want to do that. Like that seemed like a really rewarding, satisfying, gratifying type of career path. So that was kind of the path I was on. I went to Bible college. I was a youth pastor for a little while. And that gave me a lot of opportunities to speak. And speaking is one of those things I felt like I was decent at. I wanted to do more of. And I'd come across through Google a few people that were doing that professionally. In fact, even in college, I worked for a guy who was a full-time speaker. And so I kind of got to help a little bit behind the curtain there and help him on travel, contracts, logistics, that sort of thing. And so just kind of like got the wheel spinning for me. Like that'd be a really cool type of career. And so when my wife was pregnant with our now oldest child, there's nothing like bringing a kid into the world that just causes you to question everything and just figure out, all right, what am I doing with my life? What do I want to be when I grow up? And there's kind of this, I don't know, quarter life crisis or something. But ultimately, it was kind of like, I think I want to give speaking a run and give this a shot. And so again, started at the time, this was 17, 18, 19 years ago or so. There was no books, podcasts, resources, training, courses, anything like that for speakers. And so I found myself, again, finding other speakers, emailing them, harassing them, stalking them. Can I pick your brain? Can I, whatever. So learned a couple things and started booking some gigs and eventually got to a point where I was doing about 60, 70 gigs a year. And that became my whole world for many, many years, traveling all over, primarily the US. And then I had a lot of people who were asking me like, hey, I want to do that. How did you build and start your speaking career? And so we started doing some coaching, teaching, training around that, developed some programs there. And that's evolved into what we do now with the Speaker Lab. So the Speaker Lab is basically a coaching training company. And we help people, like as you mentioned, with the business of speaking. How do you actually find and book gigs? How do you get booked and paid to speak and make both an impact and an income with your message?
Grant, I want to unpack something you said there real quick. You said you learned a couple of things and you kind of glazed over that. I'd be curious for all the people listening who want to build a budding speaking career. What were those things you learned and how impactful were they?
Yeah. So, even to this day, what we do within the Speaker Lab is we teach basically a 5-step process called the Speak framework that you kind of alluded to there. It makes the acronym SPEAK, SPEAK. And so for anybody on their speaking journey, whether you want to speak full time or you just want to do a few gigs here or there on the side, this is the framework that we teach. This is what we walk people through. So the first part of the process, S, is to select a problem to solve. Select a problem to solve, meaning like you have to be really, really clear about who you speak to and what problem are you solving for that audience. Now, the mistake a lot of speakers make here is we tend to spread the net as far and wide as possible. And so who do I speak to? I don't know, man. I speak to people. I speak to humans. My message is for everybody. And what do you speak about? I don't know. What do you want me to speak about? I can speak about anything. We can talk about sales or marketing or leadership or business or family or faith or sports or like on and on the list goes. even if you know something about those various topics, doesn't mean that you want to position yourself as that. So you want to, again, solve one specific problem for one specific audience. We always like to think of it as you want to be the steakhouse and not the buffet. The steakhouse, not the buffet. Meaning, let's imagine we were all going to go out to eat. We're looking for a good steak. Like, we have a choice. We could go to a buffet where steak is one of 100 things that they offer and they're all mediocre. Or we could go to a steakhouse where they do one thing, but they do that one thing really, really well. They don't do tacos. They don't do lasagna. They don't do sushi. They do steak, and that is it. And so they're not trying to appeal to vegetarians. They're not trying to appeal to anybody and everybody. They're saying, no, like, we're a steakhouse. This is what we do. And it's counterintuitive, but the more narrow, the more focused we are as speakers, the easier it is to actually find and book gigs versus trying to spread this broad, vague net to anybody and everybody that's looking for a speaker. Like, that's ineffective, and that doesn't work. So that's the first part of the process, S, selecting a problem to solve. So once you're clear on that, everything else we're going to cover here becomes so much simpler because you know what you're looking for. Next part of the process, P, is to prepare your talk. So be really, really clear on what is the solution that you are providing to the problem that you've identified. Next part of the process is E, is to establish yourself as the expert. Establish yourself as the expert. So 2 key marketing assets that you need. Number 1 is a website. In this day and age, if you don't have a website, you don't exist. It's hard for people to take you seriously. And number 2 is that you need a demo video. Now, what exactly is a demo video? So I always like to think about this like a movie trailer. So before any of us would go see a movie, they're going to take an hour and a half, 2 hour movie. They're going to boil it down to 2 or 3 minutes. And within those 2 or 3 minutes, you have an idea of what's the plot, what's the theme, what's the genre, who's in it, what's the storyline. And the goal of a movie trailer and the goal of a demo video is to make people want to see more. And the same thing is true again with that demo video of people who, event planners, decision makers who are going, I'm considering hiring you, but are you going to be a good fit? Are you what we're looking for? How much of a risk are you if I put you up on stage? And so that demo video helps reduce that risk. The next part of the process, A, is to acquire paid speaking gigs. Now, this is the part we want to fast forward to, dude, just tell me how to book gigs. But again, you got to have these other foundational pieces in place first. Now, the mistake that speakers make here is saying okay, I've got my website, I got my demo video, and now I don't know, man, I just sit back and I wait for the phone to ring. It just doesn't work like that. You have to be much more proactive rather than reactive. So we teach a process of identifying event planners, decision makers, starting conversations, following up with them, staying top of mind, and doing that becomes very, very effective. And then the last part of the process, K, is know when to scale. Know when to scale, meaning a lot of people who are interested in speaking are also interested in writing a book or coaching or consulting or doing a podcast or doing a course. And I always say you can do all the things, but you can't do all the things at once. Something is going to come first. Something's going to come last. You got to be clear about how speaking fits into the mix there. So I know we covered a lot there, but that's kind of, again, that overview of some of those lessons I learned early on and things that we've kind of refined and figured out along the way for the past 18, 19 years in the speaking industry.
So Grant, one of the things I've seen a lot of times when people look at successful people like yourself, right? I mean, you're not only an established speaker, but you teach thousands of people how to do what you've done successfully, right? But I think, and you kind of alluded to this, a lot of times people jump over a lot of the hard work, a lot of the prep work. They I just want to, whether it's I want to be a professional speaker, I want to get on stage, or really, candidly, anything in life. Can you talk to, if when you talk about even just creating your talk, if somebody is trying to create something that's going to be, 45 minute to an hour long talk, can you speak to the amount of time, energy, and effort it's going to take to just build out that piece?
Yeah, it takes an enormous effort. And a lot of it ties into the stakes of what you are speaking at. Okay. Meaning if you're just doing something casual and it's just, something kind of Q&A, then it may require much less prep versus if you're saying, okay, I'm giving a 45-minute presentation to the board of my company, and this is going to have a huge impact on my career or whether or not I get, this promotion or whatever, you're probably going to want to put some energy, effort into that more so than just kind of just kind of wing it, So I think one of the important things to know is that the best speakers on the planet, they don't just get up and wing it. They don't just make stuff up. They don't just shoot from the hip and scribble some thoughts on a napkin and hop up there and hope it all works out. They really spend a significant amount of time behind the scenes, practicing, preparing, rehearsing. So by the time they get up, it may look like they're just going through the motions, or they're just wow, they're just naturally charismatic or good at this. But the reality is they've spent so much time behind the scenes preparing for that. So it looks like it's just natural. So a good way to think about this is if you look at athletes or musicians or artists, and they get up there and like, wow, they're just naturally athletic, or wow, they're charismatic on stage, or whatever it may be. And like, yeah, there may be an element of that, but also there's been a significant amount of work that's gone in behind the scenes so that by the time they show up on stage, it looks effortless. And so I think really spending the time behind the scenes to practice, to prepare, makes such a big difference in terms of how you present, how you show up as a speaker. Now, it's also important to note that over time, you tend to develop more confidence, and you tend to get better and figure out what works. Whenever you are giving a presentation, you're making an educated guess. I think this is funny. I think this will make sense. I think this will resonate. But you don't really know until you get up in front of that audience and you get that real time feedback. It's kind of one of the unique mediums where you see immediately how people are responding. It's when people are listening to this, the three of us will never like sit and watch someone listen to this. I'm like, okay, let's see, let's just observe for a second here. Or when, if someone's reading a book, the author isn't just sitting there just like analyzing them. But when you speak, you immediately figure out like, is this working? Is this not working? Is this landing? Is this making sense? Are people with me? Are they distracted? Are they on their phones? Are they asleep? Are they engaged? Like, where are they in that? And whenever you get that feedback, it informs the presentation. It makes the presentation better. So imagine like I'm not a cook or a chef. I know squat about food, but if a chef is preparing a new dish, they are making an educated guess, and then they're going to iterate. I'm going to taste it and then say, okay, I need to cook it a little longer, or maybe we overcooked it, or we need to add a little bit more butter, or we had too much salt. And you're kind of just taste testing and making those iterations. And the same thing is true with a speaker. You're giving a presentation, getting that real time feedback that informs and makes the presentation better each time that you're giving it.
Excellent.
Is it fair to assume that many speakers, especially earlier in their journey, and let's say maybe you've done this 20 or 30 times and you think you've done it a lot, is it fair to say that that's one of the more overlooked elements of a speaker growing in their journey of being a very compelling speaker?
Yeah, I think it's like anything, is that you need reps and you need at bats and you just need to do the thing, So you can watch TED Talks, you can read books, you can listen to interviews, but there's nothing that compares to just getting up on stage and doing the thing. And so if you want to get better as a speaker, you got to speak. And again, this is not exclusive to speaking. This is true with anything. If you want to get better as a podcaster, you podcast. You want to get better as a writer, you write. If you want to get better as playing some type of sport or instrument, you got to do the thing, And so, yeah, absolutely. Whenever you are speaking 20, 30, 40 times, you're going to naturally, hopefully get better over time. You look at some speakers who have been doing this for decades and you're just like, wow, they are really, really good. Yeah, because they've just had a lot of practice, which is another trap that it's easy for newer speakers to fall into, of going like, man, I won't be as good as they are. And like, yeah, but you're looking at where they are like several levels into the game and you're just getting started. Like, that's not even a fair comparison, right? It's like starting basketball and saying like, oh, I'm not as good as, Jordan or LeBron or whoever. It's like, yeah, because they've just been doing it for their entire life. It's unrealistic or unfair to assume that like you would suddenly be at that kind of level. So the reality is like when they got started, they also probably were not that great at it, but they put in enough of the reps and stuck with it long enough that they get better over time, and it makes them what they are today.
Excellent. So I'm going to use myself as an example. I think you get yourself to a certain level where you've been able to establish yourself. And so going from SPE and the E to the A in speak seem to be a part or an area where people stall, myself included, to a certain degree, where I've probably spoke. I'm going to use a loose number of close to 200 times, including small local chamber of commerce events and etc. What is the thing that gets them over the hump to get not just their first paid speaking event, but to get it to where the majority of the speaking opportunities are paid at some level? What are the things that are just holding people back in that journey?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One is, I think there's a difference between people who treat speaking like a hobby versus a business. And there's going to be people who are going like, yeah, I'm going to kind of dip my toe in this, and it's kind of this side hustle thing, and I'm going to kind of put some amateur effort in, and I hope to expect professional results. And then they're just shocked when that doesn't happen. It's kind of like, if I, me and a buddy, we we work out a couple times a week and show up and lift weights, and not because we enjoy it, but just because we're not as young as we used to be. And apparently you're supposed to lift weights to stay in shape. And so we've been doing this for, I don't know, close to a year now. We work out 2-3 times a week. The past, I'd say 2, 3, 4 months or so, we've been hit and miss on travel and, different schedules and stuff. So we've been going to the gym once a week, sometimes twice a week on a good week. Right. And so there are times we go in and I'm just like, we were there this morning and I'm looking at this other dude. I'm just like, that guy just like, he looks like he's got his crap together, but also I've noticed every time I'm in here, he's in here, he's putting in the work, so it's one of those things where I can't look at that guy as like, man, that guy looks like he's got his health figured out there, and assume like, why am I not doing that if I'm showing up to the gym once a week, and every time I'm here, that guy's here. So I think that's the case with speakers. And again, this isn't exclusive to speakers. This is anybody, building something, of going like, I'm going to kind of, dabble in it and stick my toe in it, put my, and just kind of mess around with it when I have time. And then I'm shocked when I don't get, the results that other people who've been putting in more effort or energy get. So I think that's a big part of it, is really taking it seriously. Are you going to do this or not? Now, also, I think it's important to note, like, everybody's expectations are going to be different. There's going to be people listening to this who say, hey, I want to be a full-time speaker. I want to do 50, 75, 100 gigs a year. That's all I want to do. And that was my career for a long time. And that's totally fine. And other people that are going like, I want to do, 5 gigs a year. And I've done some speaking before. Maybe I've been paid a time or two. I'd love to do more gigs. I'd love to get paid more. What do I need to do? And both are acceptable answers, but you got to be clear about, for you, what it is that you are hoping to get out of it. Now, the important thing to note then is whatever the end result is that you're trying to get to, you got to make sure that the work that you're putting in is what leads to that effort. And so the mistake a lot of speakers will make is going, how do I find gigs? Well, I just sit back and I wait for the phone to ring. I wait for people to find me. And sometimes that works. Meaning like, people will reach out from time to time and want to book you for something. And like, that's great. But like, it's hard to build a business that way, is if you just sit and wait all the time. And so being much more proactive, having a process, having a system to identify, reach out to, follow up with event planners, decision makers that are looking for what it is that you have to offer. And again, being consistent with that. Those are the things that start to actually move the needle and make a difference. It's simple, but it's just not easy, So it's kind of like if I said, if you wanted to lose 10 pounds, what do you need to do? Well, I'm no health expert or dietitian or anything like that, but I know you need to pay attention to what you eat and you need to exercise. Like, we all get that, right? It's simple, but that doesn't mean it's easy. Oh, okay, great. Just pay attention to what I eat and exercise. Yeah, sure, I can do that. Like, well, okay, it sounds simple, but it still requires work and effort and discipline and taking it seriously and being committed to that. And so there's oftentimes the speakers who are just kind of like sticking their toe in it, versus the speakers that are like, no, I'm all in on this. I'm making this happen with or without you. There's definitely a difference in the results that you see.
Grant, I'm curious, when you first kind of took the leap, right, and said, this is what I'm going to be. I want to be a professional speaker. Those first 1, 2, 3 times where you're on stage, if you can step back and kind of put yourself in those shoes again, what was the mindset you had? What was, the challenges you first saw? Candidly, even what were you talking about, back then?
Yeah. So early on, like, I did a lot in the education space. So I just spoke at a lot of high school conferences, high school assemblies, colleges, youth events. And so that was a good chunk of my career early on. And yeah, there's definitely, I think early on, and even, I don't know that this ever goes away, it gets a little quieter, but there's still like the imposter syndrome of like, who am I to be up here? And why would these people pay me money? And why would they listen to me? And so I think that that's totally normal and that's totally natural. And so again, I think that over time, the more reps that you put in, I think you start to build some confidence. I recognize for myself, like, I'm a decent speaker. I know, like, I'm not the best, I'm not the worst. But I know that I've done enough of this that I'm competent as a speaker. And so I think early on, you're just trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work. Another kind of misconception with speaking is that every time you speak, you're presenting a brand new talk, a brand new presentation. And that's not really the way it works. typically, assuming that you are speaking to different audiences each time that you speak, you're typically giving the same presentation or some version of the same presentation, because again, it makes it better over time. Because the first time you give that talk and versus the 100th time that you give that talk, like the 100th time, it's just going to get better. Because again, like we touched on, you're going to get that real-time feedback. You're going to figure out like that joke didn't work at all, but actually when I told it this way, it was funny and that made sense. And when I told this story, like that audience really leaned in, like they really resonated with that. Or when I was making that point, like everybody was lost. So maybe I need to do some more, probing and prodding there. And so that feedback that you get from the audience makes you a better speaker over time. And so I think, especially early on, like you're doing your best and showing up and just trying to keep swinging. And I'm sure if I look back now, I'd be like, oh my gosh, that was awful. I can't believe how bad I was. But at the time, you're just like, this is amazing. I can't believe these people are paying me, $50 to speak. This is the world's greatest thing. And you're just, you're chasing a dream and building something.
That's
Well,
amazing.
and that story of
Grant,
persistence is incredible.
yeah, it is. When I think about the average person who's maybe done a little bit of speaking, what are a couple of tips that they can take in consideration to get better? Because I think about myself and early on some of my speaking opportunities. I thought it was good, but until the time where I saw pictures of me or saw a video of myself speaking and I thought, whoa, that's way too much on a slide, or I'm packing too much into this 40 minutes. I learned of ways, just like you suggested. Every time there was a couple of takeaways that I realized I thought it was good, but then you look back and you either see something or hear something, or maybe it's a question. There's a feedback all over that you can use to get better. But what are the two or three biggest things that you find are kind of revolutionizing the way someone speaks and presents?
Yeah, I think one is going to be again the kind of your process for preparing for a presentation. Again, like we touched on earlier, the best speakers really spend some intentional time to really think through and craft everything that they're going to say. And so, one exercise that is helpful is, if you're giving some type of speech presentation, is to actually manuscript out your talk. Like write it out word for word what you're going to say. Now, don't get caught up in this, where I'm not saying you need to have then a script that you need to memorize and deliver verbatim. Do not do that. We'll come back to what we actually do with it. But the point of this is if you really sat down and thought about, like think of it this way. If you were to ask me, Grant, tell me about whenever you proposed to your wife. Like, okay, I was there. It's been a minute, but I could tell you that story. But if you said, Grant, leave for an hour, think about the story, write it out, come back and tell it to us, I could probably tell you a better story. And if I think about the details, the nuance of, okay, what was that day like? And what was the weather? What did we say to each other? Did we cry? Who did we call? How did she respond? What did I say? What did she say? If I think about all the details of it, it just makes it a more interesting, compelling story, because I've just put more thought and intentionality versus like, oh, let me just tell you the story that I kind of remember. So I think that really, like, manuscripting it out can make a big difference. There's going to be some things that you say, and you're like, yeah, I can kind of say this a couple different ways. It doesn't make a huge difference. And other things that you're like, no, I want to say it this way. And here's this key line or this key point or this key part of the story. And this way is the way that I want to say it. And so thinking some of that through ahead of time, I think helps to become a better presentation. Now, let's say that you've done that and you've got a manuscript there. It's like, okay, what do I do with all these words now? The point again isn't to memorize it like you're memorizing some Hollywood script or a scene or something. Like, more importantly is to get, again, kind of the essence of it, of you know where it's going, and okay, I'm going to talk about this, and then I tell this story, and it kind of, here's what that transition looks like to lead into this point. And so a way to think about this is that, if you go to a sporting event and they're singing the national anthem, if the person singing the national anthem forgets the lyrics, everybody knows that they forgot the lyrics because they know what the lyrics are supposed to be. But if you're giving a presentation and you forget the line, or you forget I forgot what story I was going to tell next, or I got my points out of order, nobody knows. Nobody has some script. They're following along like, oh, hang on, let's go back there. You missed something. Like, nobody knows. Nobody has any idea. So don't feel like you have to memorize this thing verbatim. But again, just having a good idea of where you're going. And also, like, whenever you are presenting, when the more time and effort and energy you put into practicing, preparing, I think the more confident that you can be on stage. So think about it like, let me give an example. I got my pilot's license about 7, 8 months ago or so, and had been working on it for a while. And I'm not going to be like a commercial pilot or something. I always just kind of thought like, that'd be kind of a fun bucket list thing to do. And it's turned out to be super, super fun. Love flying around. And so currently at the time of this recording, I'm working on what's called my instrument rating. And what that allows me to do is kind of another rating for pilots that allows them to like fly through clouds and lower visibility and just overall be a safer pilot. So a week from tomorrow, at the time of this recording, I have my what's called a check ride, which is basically your final exam for this. And so you meet with an examiner and you got to know your crap. They're going to quiz you on stuff, and you got a practical exam. You got to demonstrate a bunch of stuff, and you either know it or you don't. And so in all of my preparation that I'm doing currently as we speak for this check ride coming up, part of the point of it is to go through it. And I'm going to show up that day, and I'm probably still going to have some butterflies, like, hey, this is kind of a big deal. But also there's going to be a level of confidence of like, I've studied, I've prepared, I'm ready for this, versus like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a disaster. I'm probably going to flunk and fail. You know, the same thing's true for speakers. The speakers that are just like, I'm just going to hop up there and wing it, and then they get nervous or uncomfortable, have butterflies. Like, yeah, no kidding. But like, if you really put the time and energy and effort into it, then you show up feeling a lot more, again, comfortable and confident that you've got this, that you're prepared, that you're ready.
So Grant, to pivot a little bit, and you alluded to this before. I mean, obviously speaking, one of the things is, you've really looked at this as a business, and then now you've expanded this into a speaker lab, and you built a very successful organization that's, in a very virtual world, which I think is unique, right? And in today's world where a lot more businesses are either virtual or hybrid and things like that. Can you talk about just kind of the progression you've gone through in building that organization, and some of the things you learned along the way about kind of how to build that repeatable culture as you guys have continued to scale?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I first started, so again, I was speaking full time, and then had some people asking me about speaking. And so we created a course out of it. This is probably 7, 8 years ago or so. And that went well and kind of evolved and pivoted from there and figured some stuff out. And then continued to hire some people and trying to, again, just figuring it out. And so this is all that say, like, fast forwarding to today, the business is certainly way bigger than I've ever anticipated or expected. But the reality is like the Speaker Lab is what I wish I had when I got started as a speaker. What are the things that I was like, man, I think I can do this if someone would just tell me what to do, and like I'll do it. I don't know what to do here. And so in many ways, there's a lot of people, again, like we've touched on, who are very much interested in speaking and want to speak at some level of capacity. And so, it's created a good opportunity for the Speaker Lab and the business. I think in terms of like our culture is, I don't know that there's anything like super revolutionary that we do. I think there's a lot of like old business wisdom that works really, really well. Treat people really, really well. Turns out is really effective. We have very, very little turnover. In fact, the last person that we had voluntarily leave, we've had to let some people go and different transitions like that. But last person who voluntarily left to go take another job was like 4 years ago. We've got about 40 something people that work for us. And so when people come, like, they just don't leave. And I think a big reason is we take good care of people. We treat people really, really well. We give people a lot of freedom and autonomy. We treat people like adults. And so we, as you alluded to, we're a completely virtual company. Part of it is like, I work from home, and I don't want to go to an office. I'd rather work from home. So when I'm not, doing something here, I can go out and see my wife and my daughters and hang out with them. And so, giving people the freedom, autonomy to work from wherever they want has been a big, big win, to work the hours that they want. And again, just treating people like grownups, just, hey, get your work done. And we're not going to micromanage you. We're not going to babysit people, incentivizing people well. So one thing that we do a lot of with some of our key team members is we have a lot of team members on profit share. And so when the company wins, they win personally. And I've told them all the time that the point of profit share is I want you to feel it. And so when things are good, I want you to feel it positively. And when things are bad, I want you to feel it. Either way, I want you to feel it. And so that creates, real trust from people and buy-in from people, like, hey, wow, I want to help us win because it helps me to personally win. Hiring good people, getting out of the way, like hiring great people who are just great at what they do and not babysitting people, not micromanaging people, giving them a lot of freedom, autonomy of like, hey, whatever you think is the best way to go about doing this works really, really well. So I think some of those, again, kind of old business wisdom, old business adages, they're effective for a reason. And so those are some things that we've tried to implement that have seemed to be a little bit effective.
Grant, in this process and what you do for your clients, how much of it is starting with getting on podcasts, speaking at virtual events? Do you feel like that's part of the foundation that someone like myself or other people out there need to lay in order to get to some of those paid speaking engagements?
No, not necessarily. I don't think there's anything wrong with those. Podcasts, doing something like this, or summits, or Facebook Lives or YouTube, or what are those things? Those. I think the good side of those things is it gives you, it gives you some version of a rep. It gives you some version of an at bat. So if I'm there's a story that I'm working on, that maybe I'd tell in this type of environment, just kind of see, does it land? Does it make sense? And am I enjoying telling it? And it gives you some opportunities to kind of, practice some of those things. But speaking on a podcast and speaking in front of an audience of, 50, 100, 1,000 people, it's just kind of a different context. So, again, nothing wrong with podcasts. I do a lot of podcast interviews. I host a podcast. And so it's a great medium, but I wouldn't necessarily say that, hey, if you want to be a speaker, then you have to do podcasts, either hosting or being a guest. It's a resource, but I don't think it's the quickest, best way to book gigs.
I think the big takeaway for me, and and as well as Dustin has been on a lot of podcasts this year, when you go back and you listen to yourself, which I'd argue most speakers don't enjoy doing because we all kind of dislike our voice. But I will say going back and listening to that is really helpful to make corrections in how you speak, how you enunciate. Sometimes you'll hear the amounts of ums and ahs you say, which I thought I eliminated most of those. And then when you go back and you're like, oh man, that wasn't very good. So again, that for me is one of those great instant feedback, self-awareness radars that you kind of develop over time. And that to me has been super helpful. And like you said before too, which was, I have variations of certain talks that I'll deliver. And, I hate to give away your keynotes on a podcast, but you can really refine your message practicing with these podcasts. And to me, those just like little stepping stones that make that paid speaking gig feel that much more comfortable when you finally get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go back to one other thing that you mentioned there about ums and ahs and that sort of thing. I think sometimes it has like a negative connotation, and yes, it can be to the point where it's like it's distracting and it's overwhelming, and someone's just like, "Golly, just spit it out. What are you trying to say here?" But at the same time, I always remind speakers that as a speaker, you are a human talking to a collection of other humans. So act like a human. I think oftentimes, actually, the more polished you are, if you become overly polished, it's not relatable because it comes across as fake. It comes across as phony. Versus, if you're hanging out with some friends and you're communicating, like, how are you going to talk? You may have, you may be eloquent, but it doesn't mean that every time you say something that every word is carefully crafted. And now I go over here and I move my hands like this and and it just feels like forced. And so again, you're as a human, you're trying to connect with, relate to an audience of humans. And so act like a human, be prepared, be polished, be ready. But again, it doesn't mean that you need to be something that you're not.
That's good feedback. Because there are those people that I've talked to, and as someone who comes from a marketing background, I've often talked a lot about video with my clients. And so often people want to go the scripted route. And I say, no, please don't do that. Because even some of the best podcasts that I've listened to by some phenomenal speakers and phenomenal entrepreneurs, there are a couple that are scripted. And I have to unsubscribe. For me, it's actually hard to listen to something that is so scripted versus something that's natural and organic, like Gary Vaynerchuk or Brad Lee. That to me is entertaining because it's a very organic conversation.
So, Grant, one of the big takeaways I have from a lot of things that you shared is whether you want to be a professional speaker or you're just speaking to coworkers this afternoon, to communicate something. Just that little bit of preparation or lot of preparation can make such a significant difference. I think a lot of times people, to your point, just want to say something. They want to get up on stage and they want to do it. And I think your comments about that preparation based on kind of what level it is, I think really can make everyone a better speaker, because just that maybe few minutes of prep before you have that meeting or have that presentation or have that talk is going to make you sound more intelligent. It's going to make you more engaging and an overall presentation better.
Yeah, absolutely. And oftentimes I think people can think like, well, speaking is very, intimidating and daunting, and I get super nervous and I have these butterflies. And oftentimes, we can confuse that nerves or those butterflies with just adrenaline and excitement of the moment. And so you think about like key moments in life where you felt something similar. So, going back to whenever I proposed to my wife, or when my daughters were born, or, if you had a big interview or something like that, where it's just kind of a big key moment, you probably felt something similar. And it wasn't like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a disaster, but more just kind of like, it's almost kind of like the body's way of being like, hey, heads up, like this is a big deal. Like, let's lock in now. You imagine like people who, NFL players who are right before the Super Bowl, like they've played hundreds and hundreds of football games in their careers, and they are very well trained. They're world class at what it is that they do. But my guess is before they go out there, they're still feeling some of those same feelings. That again, just kind of like that adrenaline, the excitement of the moment. Like, hey, let's lock in now. This is super important. And so don't confuse those nerves for just the excitement and the adrenaline of the moment. And if anything, it's just your body's way of reminding you like this matters. This is a big deal. Like, pay attention here.
You bet.
Grant, before we wrap up this episode, I would love to talk and learn more about the Speaker Lab and what you're doing. I know you've alluded to some of the high-end stuff you're doing over there, but it looks like you've worked with some really big names, people with podcasts that I've known and listened to. Tell us a little bit more about the Speaker Lab and where our listeners can find you.
Yeah. So again, everything we do is over at thespeakerlab.com, thespeakerlab.com. If you listen to this show, you probably listen to other shows. So we've got a podcast by the same name, the Speaker Lab Podcast. We've got 470 some episodes there. So definitely check that out. And then we touched on that Speak framework earlier. We got a book that goes through that a little bit more, The Successful Speaker, 5 steps for booking gigs, getting paid, building your platform. So would encourage you to check that out if you want to go deeper on how do you actually find and book gigs? What's that process? We kind of touched on it quickly, but there's a lot more to the nuts and bolts of that. And then, if you're interested in working with us, again, all the details are at thespeakerlab.com. So if you just want to schedule a call with one of our team members and kind of learn a little bit more and help us kind of figure out like what it is that you're looking for. Maybe you're like, I know that I like speaking. I'm not even sure what the options are of how it could possibly fit in, or, what's on the buffet here. That's certainly something that we could talk through and help you kind of navigate.
Just for context, what does pricing model look like? Because there's probably a lot of people out there thinking like, oh, I don't know if I can afford this. Give us some perspective on how that works.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is like I tell people like you don't have to spend anything with us. We have a podcast that we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours for free. So there's a guy we interviewed, I don't know, maybe a year or so ago, and he had reached out. He'd sent an email in, and he said, "Hey, I Googled, I found you guys. I wanted to be a speaker. I listened to every episode. I just did what you said. And now I'm a 6-figure speaker." And so he never paid us a dime. I was like, dude, that's awesome. That's great. You can pick up a book, for 10, 15, 20 bucks, whatever it is. Actually, I think we got it free on the website. And so, you can do that and you don't have to pay us anything. So take what we've talked about here and implement it and apply it. Now, if you want more hand-holding, more help, then, we can talk about some different options there. We've got some different, payment plans and different ways that we can work with speakers. But again, make no mistake, like all the information's out there. We tell you what to do, the podcast, the book, it's up to you to implement and apply it. But if you want some more hand-holding support and help there, we're happy to help you.
You heard it right here, folks. It's that easy. You can do it. You just got to put some time and effort into it. Well, Grant, before you leave us, tell us a little bit more about where people can find you. Where can we engage with you? Obviously, we got your podcast, your website. Where are you most active on social media right now?
Honestly, I don't do a ton on social. I kind of every so often will pop into a LinkedIn, a Twitter, an Instagram. So you can find me in those places. But for the most part, everything we do is over at thespeakerlab.com. My personal site's grantbaldwin.com. We don't do a ton there, but thespeakerlab.com is kind of the hub of activity.
You rock. Thank you so much, Grant. Really appreciate it. Awesome conversation. And for those of you listening, we appreciate your ears. Thanks for listening to another episode. We'll see you next time. Peace.
Thank you for being part of the Hustle Nation. If you're serious about raising the bar in your personal and professional life and willing to go all in on your success, head over to hustleleaders.com. Here you can get access to our Hustle Productivity ebook, attend our Hustle Masterclass, or challenge yourself to the 30-day Hustle Challenge. Pairing these tools and training with the Hustle Nation podcast will help you advance to a whole new level. Until next time, stay hungry and inspire those around you to hustle.